They dragged me through my own kingdom, as if I were already dead. The streets that used to cheer for my slow steps, now narrowed and emptied, shuttering windows like the walls could swallow sound. Torches burned too bright. Chains bit too hard. Every guard who passed me looked away as if eye contact would make them complicit. I was the conquered princess. Once. Now, I was a prisoner in the conqueror's shadow. The accusation came like a rehearsed prayer. Treason. Night meetings. Letters meant for the old kingdom's surviving commanders. A plan to poison the man who had broken our banners. My family delivered it with the practiced grief of people who wanted to mourn the accusation rather than the truth. My sister, Mariswin, stood closest, her expression arranged into something almost believable. She spoke my name softly while others waited for her verdict to land like a blade. The council murmured. The court leaned in. Then her eyes flicked just once. To the guards behind me, a silent command. The kind you give when you've already decided what you want the world to believe. I tried to speak. The words wouldn't come. Not because I lacked courage, because my throat remembered the last time I'd begged for mercy, and it had tasted metal after someone had pressed a charm to me earlier that day, tightening around my voice like a binding knot. So I watched them build a lie around my silence. My father's gaze refused mine. My mother's mouth trembled. But she never said my name, the way a mother should. My aunt, who once told me the stars had moods, looked at the ground as if the earth could absolve her. By the time the sentence was declared, I understood something that had been growing in my bones for weeks. They weren't afraid of what I might do. They were afraid of what I already was. They pushed me into the dungeon of the Conqueror's Keep before I could be taken anywhere else. The stairwell spiraled down like a throat-swallowing light. Iron walls sweated. The air smelled of stone, damp straw, and something older, something that lived under the castle, like a secret. When the door sealed, cold settled over my shoulders. I sat on the floor and tried to breathe through the fear. The Conqueror's name was Caelthrin. Everyone spoke it with distance, as if the syllables could cut. He had come like a storm across our lands. He had broken our king's armies and taken the throne without asking permission. He wasn't cruel for sport, the villagers had said in whispers. He was cruel because he didn't know any other way to stay alive. But I had never seen him. Only his silhouette on banners and in the carved statues that now stood where my people's gods used to be. They left me in the dark. No guards came with food at first, no priest, no mercy. Just silence and the occasional echo of distant steps, as if something heavy moved above and behind the stone. When hunger finally clawed its way through my ribs, I pushed myself to my feet and searched for anything I could use. There was a bucket by the wall, half filled with rainwater. There was a strip of cloth, ruined by damp. There was nothing else. I began to do what I had always done when fear threatened to steal my mind. I made rules. Rule 1, don't waste breath on panic. Rule 2, map your surroundings. Rule 3, when you can't fight the world, learn to survive it. The dungeon was narrow, but not empty. There were marks on the stone, shallow grooves carved into the wall at intervals. A pattern, my fingers traced it, not like a prisoner, like a student. The grooves were old, not made by the conqueror's soldiers. Made by someone who understood runes. I didn't know the language, but my blood remembered the shape of magic. The crescent scar at my throat burned faintly, though no one had touched it in days. I'd always wondered why that mark had appeared the year my powers first surfaced. I'd been told it was a birthmark, a sign from the royal line. Now it felt like a key when the heavy door finally opened. It brought a presence. Caelthrin stepped into the dungeon alone. No entourage, no guards at his shoulders, only him, and the air changed around him like the room was holding its breath. I expected anger in his expression. I expected contempt. I expected a conqueror's smile. What I saw instead made my stomach twist. His face was carved with discipline, but his eyes carried something caged and restless, something that watched me the way a hunter watches a fragile creature. He didn't speak at first. He circled the cells slowly, as if studying where the light fell, where my hands could reach, where my body would fail. Then his gaze landed on my throat, the scar heated. Caelthran paused. In the quiet, I heard it, faint, like a heartbeat under the floor, a growl that didn't belong to the room, a beast, his beast. That was what people had whispered, hadn't they? That Caelthran wasn't only a warrior, but a wolf-thrown monster bound to a man's bones. His walls weren't only stone, they were made of something primal. He stopped in front of me and looked down. "I didn't bring you down here to die," he said at last. His voice was low, rough around the edges like he'd dragged it through gravel. I wanted to answer, but the charm at my throat still held. So I lifted my chin anyway, offering the only proof of innocence I could manage. My posture, my refusal to break. He leaned slightly closer. The air around him smelled faintly of rain and iron. The beast inside him shifted. I felt it in the stone, in the way my skin tightened. Caelthran's eyes narrowed. Then unexpectedly he reached down and placed 2 fingers near my scar, not touching skin directly, a hovering test. His touch didn't burn, it awakened. My power surged, as if it had been waiting for this exact scent of him, this exact vibration in the air. The runes on the dungeon wall flickered faintly, like embers responding to a hand held too close. Caelthran's nostrils flared. The beast growled again, deeper. For a moment his face looked less like a conqueror and more like a man trapped inside an animal's instinct. Then his hand withdrew. He stood back, and the dungeon seemed to exhale. "You're marked," he said. The way he spoke wasn't wonder, it was warning. He turned to leave, but before the door could close, the shadows along the corridor shifted. I saw the pale glimmer of eyes. Too many eyes, watching. Wolves. They pressed close to the bars, even though there were no bars in the dungeon, only stone and the heavy door. Somehow they looked through the threshold anyway. Their attention landed on me like weight, not hostility, not exactly kindness. Recognition. Caelthran didn't notice the way they watched me, or if he did, he pretended not to. "Eat," he said, and threw a wrapped bundle onto the floor. Food, not poisoned, not taunting. Bread, some dried meat, and a small pouch that smelled like herbs. I stared at it. The charm at my throat eased for a heartbeat, just enough to let a sound escape me. A thin, broken word. "Why?" My voice was scraped raw, but it was mine. Caelthran paused at the door, his shoulders rigid. He didn't turn fully. "I need answers," he said, "and I've learned prisoners sometimes know more than their guards." Then he left. I ate anyway. Not because I trusted him, because I refused to die hungry while the truth waited somewhere in the dark. I became careful with the food, half for strength, half for tomorrow. That's how I survived the first week, but the dungeon wasn't the only danger. The danger lived in the way Caelthran's people spoke about me above ground. They never called me princess anymore, they called me traitor. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they spat. Once, I heard a guard brag that my family had begged for my execution, as if that made them righteous. Then, one evening, something changed. I woke to the sensation of warmth against my skin. The dungeon was colder than ever, but a heat gathered near the door, not from the stone, from a presence. When I crawled toward it, I saw the wolves. They stood outside the heavy threshold like sentinels. Their fur was dark and mottled with moonlight. Their eyes held steady. One wolf shifted, and I heard a scrape of something hard against stone, like a nail dragging. It nudged a small wooden bowl through a crack at the bottom of the door. It wasn't much, water, warm water, but it wasn't offered by a guard. It wasn't delivered by a servant. It was given. I reached for the bowl with trembling fingers. Before I could lift it, another wolf pressed closer. Its head lowered just slightly. An invitation with teeth. I didn't flinch. Instead, I breathed slowly and held my palm out. My skin smelled a wild fur, The cold night, the faint metallic edge of power. The wolf's nostrils touched my fingers. Then it withdrew, letting me take the bowl. I drank. The water tasted like it had been warmed with herbs. Catherine didn't appear that night. But when the door finally opened for the morning, I understood the message. The king wasn't the only one deciding whether I lived. His beast and his pack were already in motion. And I was the center. That afternoon, Catherine returned with a different kind of silence. He stood across from the cell, hands behind his back. The wolves behind him held their bodies rigid, like guards who knew they weren't supposed to be tender. He watched me carefully. "You're learning the runes," he observed. I looked away, buying time. Then I forced myself to meet his gaze. I couldn't use my voice fully yet, but I could use my hands. I traced the pattern on the wall and let power run through my fingers, pulling at the old marks as if they were threads. The dungeon responded. The grooves brightened faintly silver. Catherine's eyes sharpened. His beast growled, lower this time. Less threat, more hunger. I felt it then. His beast didn't simply react to danger. It reacted to me. "Your mark is waking," he said. "Not mine," I managed, and the charm at my throat cracked enough for my words to come out uneven. "It's yours too." Catherine froze. His jaw tightened. "That's impossible," he said. The denial sounded too immediate. It sounded like fear. Fear he didn't let himself name. I swallowed, tasting bitterness. "I don't think you understand what the court did to me." He stared as if searching for a lie. Every word felt like it could be used against me, so I began with the simplest truth I could offer. My sister had insisted on certain details: where I'd be, who would be in the halls, which messenger I would meet. She had also begged my parents to allow a private conversation, claiming she wanted to help me. Private conversations were traps in the royal court. I told Catherine how I had refused to meet Mariswin that night. I told him how she had threatened the servants until they believed she was telling the truth. I told him the letters were never mine, and I showed him something else. I lifted my sleeve and pulled back the cloth to reveal faint ink stains hidden beneath my skin, ink that didn't belong to me, but to the charm used to bind my voice. Catherine's gaze flicked to my throat again. He stepped closer. The wolves shifted, but they didn't block him. He crouched, studying my skin like a soldier reads a map. Then he smelled my mark. His eyes closed for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, something had changed. Not softness, not mercy. Something more dangerous. Certainty. "You're not a traitor," he said. The sentence landed like a blow. Because it meant he believed me. Because it meant he had been lied to. Because it meant the betrayal reached farther than my family's walls. I should have felt relief. I didn't. I felt a new kind of terror. If the king believed me now, then someone else would have to answer for what they'd done. And answering would be bloody. Catherine stood and gestured to the wolves with one subtle motion. They parted like obedient shadows. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will come with me." "Where?" I tried to ask. My voice broke into a rasp. He didn't answer at first. Then he looked down at the runes glowing on the wall, at the crescent mark on my throat. He said, "To the place where the old truth is kept." That night, I didn't sleep. I gathered what little control I had left. I worked on the charm at my throat, with my mind pulling at the threads, the way I'd pulled at tapestry knots when I was younger. I didn't know if my efforts would be enough, but I refused to be helpless. When dawn bled into the dungeon, the door opened. Catherine waited with 2 guards, but the guards stayed behind the threshold while he walked close enough for me to see the faint shadowing in his eyes. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a man who had found a door in a wall he'd been told was solid. "Walk," he ordered. I did. The dungeon air clung to me like wet cloth, but I stepped into the corridor anyway. The wolves padded beside us, not crowding, not blocking. Their bodies created a path. Guards moved aside like the pack had authority beyond law. I knew then that Caelthran's rule wasn't only fear, it was a bond. The hidden passage led to an underground hall carved with stars. There were murals of wolves in flight, wolves made of ink and moonlight, their bodies forming constellations. At the center sat a stone pedestal holding a sealed reliquary. Caelthran didn't touch it at first. He looked at me. The beast inside him stirred, pacing, restless. "I didn't want to bring you here," he said, and the way he spoke sounded like he meant it. His restraint tightened around the room. "Because you would have been safe in the dungeon," he continued. I lifted my chin. "Safe where?" "In lies." My voice finally held steady enough to sound angry. Not because I wanted a fight. Because anger was proof. I still belonged to myself. Caelthran's eyes darkened. Then his beast exhaled through his nostrils like a storm releasing pressure. "Your family lied," he said. "The court lies," I corrected. "My sister lied." His jaw clenched at the mention. But he didn't name her. He didn't need to. He reached for the reliquary. The moment his fingers brushed the seal, the room reacted. Runes on the walls flared. The air turned sharp. I felt my scar pulse. Caelthran didn't yank his hand away. The reliquary opened with a crack of stone. Inside wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror, oval shard of dark glass with silver veins running like roots. When Caelthran lifted it, the mirror didn't reflect his face. It reflected mine. Not just my image, my history. The mirror showed nights I'd forgotten I'd ever lived, the year my powers first appeared, the night I'd been taken from the royal chamber, the night someone had tried to bind my magic before it could bloom. Then the mirror shifted. It showed Mariswin. Not as my sister, as a shadow behind our family's unity. The scenes were brief, but devastating. Mariswin had orchestrated my binding. She had delivered the letters. She had fed my parents fragments of truth, shaped to look like treason. She had used my own magic against me. I stumbled back, hand flying to my throat, as if I could hold my power inside. Caelthran caught my elbow. His touch was firm but not harsh. The wolves tensed at once, but the moment his hand settled, they calmed, like they trusted him more than their instincts. I stared at the mirror shard. My family's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was magical, a conspiracy with runes and sealed truths. Caelthran's beast growled, and the sound vibrated through my bones. "What is she?" I whispered. Caelthran's fingers tightened slightly on my elbow. "Not what your blood says," he replied. "Something else." He lowered the mirror. The room dimmed. Then, as if the hall had been waiting for this moment, a hidden door at the far wall slid open with a grinding sigh. Warm air flowed out, not mouldy dungeon air, fresh air, sacred air. Caelthran stepped forward, but he didn't take me with him immediately. Instead, he reached toward my throat, again slow, careful-like. He expected me to recoil. I didn't. I wanted the charm gone. I wanted my voice back. When his fingers hovered close, the scar pulsed in response. Caelthran's eyes widened faintly. Then he pressed 2 fingers to my throat. The charm shattered. A burst of cold ran through me, followed by a rush of heat. I gasped. My voice returned all at once, raw and loud in the stone hall. Caelthran flinched, not from pain, but from surprise. He hadn't expected the charm to break so cleanly. I stepped closer to the doorway that had opened. "What's inside?" I demanded. Caelthran's stare held me like a vow. "The place you were taken from," he said. My breath caught. "How do you know?" His beast shifted. The wolves behind us lowered their heads. It wasn't his answer I feared. It was the weight behind it. He moved first, entering the hidden chamber. I followed. Inside was a pool of dark water under a ceiling painted with moons. Floating above the pool were threads of light, silver and pale gold, like strands of fate. When I stepped near, my scar burned. Then the threads lifted and swirled around me. I felt the pull of something ancient and familiar. A lineage, a choice. My power surged, not violently, not wild, like something returning home. Caelthran stood at the edge, watching with a tension that made the room feel smaller. "Do you hear it?" he asked. I closed my eyes. Between heartbeats, I heard a whisper in the language of wolves, meant for bloodlines that carry both human will and beast instinct. It wasn't calling me to kill. It was calling me to bond, to anchor, to become something the kingdom had been missing. I opened my eyes slowly. Caelthran's gaze met mine, and his beast pressed forward through his body, like it wanted to step into the water too. But he didn't. He held back, because he knew this was mine. "Why me?" I asked, voice shaking. Caelthran's expression shifted, hard edges softening just enough to show something raw underneath. He didn't say the answer. His pack answered first. The wolves stepped closer to the pool's rim. Their fur bristled, but they weren't threatening. They were offering their presence, their submission to a bond, a vow, without words. Caelthran swallowed. Then he spoke quietly. "Because you're the last piece," he said, "and because my beast recognized you before I admitted it could." My heart thudded. Not because I believed romance, because I believed power. A king's beast didn't misrecognize fate. I stared at the water, at the threads of light, at the way the strands curled around my wrists, like gentle restraints. I realized something with a clarity that hurt. My powers weren't hidden because they were dangerous to everyone. They were hidden because they were dangerous to the people who had used them. Mariswin wanted my magic bound forever. My family wanted a traitor story because the truth would destroy them. And Caelthran, this conqueror, had been pushed into believing lies that served someone else's agenda. The mirror shard had shown me that the dungeon runes had proven it. Now the pool was finishing the truth. I dipped 2 fingers into the water. The threads of light snapped into place around me. A sensation like warm thunder filled my chest. Then I saw a vision, quick as a blink. Caelthran kneeling beside my throne years ago, before he conquered, not as conqueror, as guardian, not as enemy, as mate called by the same bloodline. My breath stuttered. He stared at me as if he'd seen something too. His beast growled low, approving, and Caelthran looked, changed, not softer, open, like a door he'd been guarding had finally swung inward. But the world outside the chamber didn't wait for my healing. A scream echoed through the keep. Guards rushed, footsteps pounded. Caelthran's head snapped toward the exit. I stepped forward too, power humming under my skin. We moved fast. We reached the throne room just as chaos unfurled. Mariswin stood on the dais like she belonged there, her smile sharp with relief and cruelty. Beside her, court officials clutched documents that claimed my guilt. When I appeared, they stiffened. Mariswin's eyes flicked to Caelthran, and the look on her face wasn't fear, it was calculation. "Princess Vesperlin," one official began, voice trembling with staged outrage. "The dungeon," Caelthran raised a hand. Silence slammed into the room. His wolves filled the space like shadows given fur. Mariswin's gaze narrowed. "My lord conqueror," she said sweetly, stepping forward. "You've been misled." I felt the charm at my throat gone, but I still couldn't trust my voice around this many people. So I spoke anyway. "I was bound," I said clearly, "by your runes, by your ink, by your lies." Mariswin laughed softly, not loud, just enough to invite disbelief. "You accuse your sister?" she asked, turning her head as if admiring her own innocence. I lifted my hand and let power spill, not like a spell hurled at her, like light revealing fingerprints on glass. The court documents in the officials' hands burst with faint silver markings, same ink patterns from my skin. The room went still. Mariswin's smile wavered. She recovered quickly, too quickly. That's when I understood her true strength. Not courage, not loyalty, control. She stepped toward the center of the room and tossed a small charm on the floor. It shattered into dark dust that swirled like smoke. The air thickened. The wolves snarled. Caelthran surged forward, but at the last moment he stopped, like something in him refused to strike without understanding. That was the first time I saw his restraint as choice, not weakness. He moved to block me, rather than attack the dust. I watched him do it, and my chest ached with something I didn't let myself name. Mariswin's eyes locked on mine. "You don't know what you are," she said. The throne room trembled, as if the words were runes. I stumbled, not from pain, but from recognition. The pool's vision had shown me a bond. Mariswin was trying to break it. She wanted me alone again, bound, silent, easy to discard. My power flared. The threads of light pulled through the air and snapped around Mariswin, not choking her, not harming her, holding her in place like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Mariswin's eyes widened. "You can't." "I can," I said, voice steadying. I stepped closer until she couldn't look away. "I didn't fight you," I whispered. "I learned you." My agency didn't come from anger. It came from understanding. Caelthran watched my power unfold without ordering me to stop. He didn't take the moment away. He just stood there, with his beast pacing behind his ribs like a loyal guard. When Mariswin tried to spit another lie, the silver ink markings on the documents rose into the air like birds. They circled her. Then they settled onto her skin. Not as punishment meant to hurt, as truth that couldn't be erased. The court gasped. Some dropped to their knees. Others backed away, suddenly aware they'd been used. Mariswin's smile finally broke. She looked at Caelthran, and for the first time there was fear. His wolves lowered their heads toward me again, as if affirming my position. He didn't move to kill Mariswin in that second. He turned his attention to the throne, to the relic, to the people who needed answers. "Remove her," he ordered, voice like stone. Guards dragged Mariswin away. I expected hatred from Caelthran. I expected him to order my execution too, as payment for betrayal. But the wolves stayed close. Their presence said what his mouth didn't. The next days weren't kind. My family's palace records were searched, their secret meetings uncovered, their written oaths against me burned in the courtyard. People learned that Princess Treason was manufactured, not just by my sister, by hidden hands inside the royal court, and those hands had likely fed Caelthran lies to ensure his conquest would remain unstable. When Caelthran called for witnesses, he didn't ask me to beg. He asked me to testify, to speak, to reclaim my voice. I did. I described everything. I told the truth with steady breath. As I spoke, the crescent scar at my throat throbbed, then cooled, like my magic liked the sound of honesty. In the evenings, Caelthran returned to the dungeon, not to punish, but to check. Not for his sake, for mine. He brought warm water, herbs, soft wraps for bruises. He didn't hover like a romantic hero. He acted like the pack, acted present, controlled, protective. Sometimes his beast paced at my door, and I could hear its restless breathing. Sometimes one wolf would curl against the wall outside my room, acting like a guard while I slept. I began to heal, not instantly, not without scars. The lies from my family clung to me, whispering that I was wrong to hope. Then I'd catch the wolves watching me when I hummed under my breath, when I cleaned the small messes in my quarters, when I braided my hair, as if I could reclaim a future. The first time I hummed, it was unconscious. A melody from my childhood. My voice didn't aim for comfort, it aimed for memory, but the sound made the wolves shift. The one with the pale streak in its fur always nearby lowered its head, like it recognized the tune. Caelthran stood behind the doorway, silent. When my hum ended, he didn't ask me to stop. He only watched me like the walls were cracking, and he didn't know when to hide the truth. Slowly, I stopped, expecting cruelty. Slowly, I let myself accept small kindnesses without flinching. That was my choice, not his. The bond between us didn't arrive like a sudden kiss. It arrived like safety, and safety was the hardest thing to believe. One night, Caelthran brought me into the stables. The air smelled of hay and sweat and something metallic from wolf fangs. His pack moved quietly behind us. He walked to the corner where old cages hung unused. Then he stopped and looked at me. "Do you know what it means when my beast chooses someone?" he asked. I swallowed. "It means you can't deny what you are." His eyes sharpened. He didn't deny that. Instead, he reached into the shadow and pulled out a collar. It wasn't made for a human neck. It was made for a magic-bound bond runes etched into the metal. A vow collar. My stomach tightened. I remembered my binding charm. I remembered the feeling of silence being stolen. I stepped back. "No," I said. My voice was firm. I didn't fight him, but I didn't submit either. Caelthran stared, and the beast inside him held still like a dog, taught patience. "Do you fear it?" he asked. "I fear being owned," I replied. The honesty hit the air like thunder. His jaw flexed. "Then I won't do it as a conqueror," he said. "I won't do it as a command." He lowered the collar. Not abandoning it, offering it, but asking for permission. That was new. That was power with restraint. I watched him carefully, searching for manipulation. His pack watched too, not with expectation, with respect. I stepped closer and touched the collar with 2 fingers. It thrummed faintly, responding to the crescent mark on my skin. But it didn't clamp. It waited. I looked up at Caelthran. "I'll decide," I said. His expression didn't smile, but his beast's posture softened, shoulders lowering, wolves settling like storms passing. "I choose you," he said quietly. Then he added, careful, as if the words might scare me if they came too fast. "Not by taking, by earning." The next morning, we travelled to the border where my old kingdom's remnants still stood. My family had kept me alive not to help me, but to preserve a story. Once the story was cracked, there was only one place they could pretend I belonged. Now that the truth was known, they tried to reclaim control. Not with chains. With exile. They sent word that I had brought curses into the royal line, and that anyone who supported my innocence would be punished. I expected Caelthran to burn their villages. Instead, he walked into court halls with wolves behind him, and a quiet brutality that didn't require violence to make people listen. When they called me a danger, his pack howled, not to attack, to declare presence. One wolf stepped to my side, then another. They didn't let the court crowd me. They built a protective ring. I felt my breath catch. I wasn't used to being defended without being controlled. Caelthran's walls came down a fraction at a time. He began to share small truths, how he'd been made to believe I was meant to destroy him, how his conquest had been guided by lies from his advisors too, how the beast inside him had snarled at those lies the moment he smelled my mark. I didn't ask for confession like a romance story. I asked for consistency like a survivor, and he gave it. Still, betrayal followed me. One final twist arrived, like a dagger hidden in a bouquet. Mariswin had not died in the cells. She'd been moved. "Prevent her escape," Caelthran ordered. But his voice carried something sharper. It carried fear. Not for himself, for what she might do before the court could hold her accountable. I demanded to go, not as a guest, as the person whose life had been rewritten by Mariswin's lies. Caelthran looked at me a long time, his beast paced. Then he nodded. "Walk beside me," he said. The dungeon beneath the border was colder than the first. The stones were etched with runes that tasted like old blood. We descended together. The wolves followed close. In the deepest chamber, Mariswin sat with her wrists bound in iron strips, but her eyes were bright, too bright. She smiled at me. "You came back," she purred. I stood still, pulse racing. "I came for the truth," I replied. Mariswin laughed and lifted her chin toward the walls. "Then look," she said. The runes on the stone flared, the air filled with a scent like burned flowers. A ward activated. The room tried to bind me again. I felt the old charm twist around my throat like invisible fingers. Panic surged. For a heartbeat, I didn't trust myself. For a heartbeat, I wanted to obey. Then, I felt it. Caelthron's presence beside me, not as a chain. As an anchor, his beast pressed close, nudging my magic like a hand guiding a flint toward sparks. The ward wasn't only trying to bind me, it was trying to force my powers into Mariswin's control. But my magic had changed. I'd healed, I'd chosen. I could still be broken if I let the fear own me. I refused. I breathed and hummed the melody from my childhood, the one that had made the wolves quiet. The hum didn't fight with teeth, it fought with rhythm. The threads of light responded. They wrapped around my throat's scar like a protective collar. They flared against the ward. Mariswin's smile faltered. She scrambled as if the floor had become fire, but the ward locked her magic into place. Truth trapped her where she meant to trap me. I stepped forward, power steadying, like a blade finding its sheath. Caelthron watched, silent. His pack howled once, and the sound shattered the ward's hold. Mariswin screamed, then the chamber went quiet. When the runes dimmed, Mariswin lay on the stone floor, eyes glassy. Not dead, but stripped of the ability to bind. I stared at her, breathing hard. "I won't carry your lies anymore," I said. Caelthron approached slowly. He didn't touch me immediately. He waited for my permission. When I nodded, he reached out and pressed his palm over my sternum through my clothes. His touch warmed, his beast softened. It felt like someone finally placing a hand on a wound and saying without words, "I see you." The court demanded judgment. Caelthron delivered it, not as vengeance, as protection. Mariswin was exiled to the far ruins, stripped of her magic and her claim. My family was exposed. Their treason charges were rewritten as what they truly were, betrayals of the crown. They pleaded, they cried, they asked me to forgive them. I looked at Caelthron's pack standing behind me. Then I looked at my own hands. Agency felt different now. Not like anger, like choice. I told the court, forgiveness is mine to give, not yours to demand. It wasn't harsh. It was firm. Forgiveness. And it transformed the room. Quote, Caelthron stepped closer afterward, his beast pressed forward, restless. I could sense his walls fighting to stay up, but I'd seen the cracks now. One day he finally asked the question that mattered. "Will you let my pack stand with you beyond conquest?" He asked. He didn't say mate, he didn't claim, he asked. I looked at his eyes the amber gold that held storms and restraint. Then I looked at the wolves around us. They waited like family. Like guardians. I remembered the weeks in the dungeon when they had slid warm water through the threshold. I remembered the mirror's truth. I remembered Mariswin's ward trying to silence me again. I remembered how I had hummed and chosen myself. So I answered honestly. "I'll let you earn it," I said. Caelthron's breath hitched. Not romance recognition. Like his beast had been craving an agreement instead of an order. He reached for the vow collar now, holding it out this time. He didn't rush. He didn't force. He waited. I lifted it myself and clasped it around his neck. The runes flared gently, not burning. They synced with my scar, like two parts of a single mechanism. Caelthron exhaled, his beast stilled. The wolves sat down as if the world had finally aligned. In that moment, I felt the destiny locked into place. Not destiny as a trap. Destiny as a home. Weeks later, the kingdom changed. Not because Caelthron ordered it, because the people saw the truth and chose to stop repeating their own cruelty. And I changed too. I stopped expecting to be punished for surviving. I stopped shrinking under gazes. My powers grew stronger through ordinary acts, feeding the wounded mending cloth, humming to steady my magic, reading runes like they were languages instead of threats. When Ceolfrun trained his warriors, I sat nearby and corrected small things with calm hands. When the old seers spoke warnings about what the stars promised, I listened, and then I rewrote the prophecy by living the truth it tried to deny. Carthren's walls came down slowly, not disappearing. They transformed. Stone became shelter, instinct became devotion. In the courtyard one night, moonlight spilled across the throne room steps, and wolves curled at my feet like living proof. Ceolfrun stood at my side, not looming, not commanding, just present. His beast rested, like it had finally found the place it wanted. I leaned into his warmth. He didn't speak immediately. When he finally did, it was a promise, grounded in action. "I won't take," he said. Then he turned his gaze to the sky, where stars looked less like fate and more like choices. "I'll protect, and you'll grow," he finished. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of rain and fur and iron. My old kingdom's lies had tried to bury me. My sister's betrayal had tried to silence me, but the beast had recognized me. The pack had chosen me. And Ceolfrun, conqueror, monster, king, had learned the hardest truth of all. Power isn't ownership. Power is the decision to stand beside someone until they believe they deserve to live. I opened my eyes, and I let the bond settle fully around my heart. Not as a cage. As a vow we both decided to keep.